My dad has always been obsessed with control. Not love, not care, not protection, control. Over the last year, he's taken it to a level I never imagined. Every week without fail, he demands to see my bank statements. Not just balances, complete screenshots. He wants to know where every dollar goes. Whether it's $2.50 at a cafe or a $15 streaming charge. He wants an explanation. And if I don't comply, he threatens to go to the police, to file legal papers to have me evicted from my mom's house. The craziest part? He doesn't live there. The house isn't his. He doesn't own a single brick of it. It's my mother's home, and she's lived there for years since they separated. But somehow, my dad talks like he owns it, like he owns me. Then, one day, he created a group chat, me, him, and my mum. I didn't know it then, but that chat would become a cage. Every Sunday night, like clockwork, a message would come through. I need screenshots of your account balances and job applications by 8 p.m. The tone was always cold, like I was a disobedient employee. My mom never responded. She just stayed in the chat, reading, watching, quiet. I tried asking her about it once. Why aren't you saying anything? I asked her in private. Don't you see what he's doing? She just shook her head and said, you know how your father is. Just give him what he wants. I stared at her, heart sinking. Give him what he wants. That became my life. Submitting my weekly financial report like a prisoner under surveillance. I couldn't even buy toothpaste without wondering what he'd say. Every purchase came with guilt. Would he ask why I spent $6 on body lotion instead of $4? Would he accuse me of wasting money? One Sunday, I was late with the screenshots. I had a bad week mentally and physically. I just needed a break. At 10:26 p.m., he texted, if I don't see those screenshots in the next 10 minutes, I'll show up at your job tomorrow morning. My heart dropped. He knew where I worked. He meant it. He didn't care about the consequences. He just wanted to control me through fear. And my mom, she read the message. Didn't say a word. That night, I cried myself to sleep. But somewhere between those tears, something changed in me. Something hardened. If no one would protect me, then I had to protect myself. I was done letting fear make my decisions. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to take back my power, even if I had to take him to court to do it. The group chat was like a leash around my neck. It started with one message. Then it became routine. Every Sunday, between 7:30 and 8 p.m., I'd get the same text from my dad. Send your bank screenshots. I want to see your weekly transactions and job applications. I used to dread Sundays because it meant Monday was coming. But now, Sunday nights carried a different kind of anxiety, one that felt like standing trial in front of a judge who didn't want justice, only control. My mother was in the chat, too, watching silently. I never understood her silence. She wasn't just my mother, she was the one person I thought would always have my back. But in that group, she became another pair of eyes, another witness to my humiliation who never once said, enough. And her silence, it was worse than my dad's threats. I remember the night I finally broke down. I had been sick all week, no energy, no appetite, barely enough strength to shower. I couldn't bring myself to job hunt, much less take screenshots to prove anything. I thought maybe, just maybe, they would understand. Instead, at 9:13 p.m., the messages came in like knives. No screenshots today. I'm not playing with you. You think this is a joke? If I don't get those images, I'll drive down to your office. I'll ask your boss what kind of daughter she raised. My blood turned cold. I had no doubt he would do it. He'd done worse over smaller things. I checked the group chat. My mom had read everything. No reply. Not even a leave her alone. Not as she's sick. Not a single defense. Just silence. I stared at the chat for a long time before replying. My hand shook as I typed. I was sick this week. I wasn't well enough to apply to anything. I'll send what I can. He didn't care. He sent a thumbs down emoji. A thumbs down. Like I was some failed task on his to-do list. That night, I didn't cry. I sat in my room, staring at my ceiling fan, realizing something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't living in my mother's house. I was living in a group chat prison. A space where my dignity was eroded, my autonomy ignored, and my humanity constantly questioned. I began to ask myself hard questions. Why did my dad need my financial information? Why was my mom letting this happen? Why did I feel more like a criminal than a daughter? The answers didn't come right away, but I knew one thing for sure. If I stayed quiet, this would never stop. If I didn't push back, the control would never end. And if my mom wouldn't speak up for me, then I'd have to speak up for myself, no matter the cost. I stopped asking my mom for help after the third time she told me, "It's just how your father is." She said it like it was an excuse, like it was a personality trait, not emotional abuse, like it was normal for a man to monitor his daughter spending down to the last $3, smoothie or $7 delivery order. But what hurt most wasn't the way my dad controlled me. It was that my mother watched it happen and never once said, "Stop." She became a shadow in that group chat. Not a mother, not a protector, just a witness, a silent one. One evening, I sat beside her in the living room while she scrolled through her phone. My dad had just sent one of his usual Sunday reminders, waiting for the screenshots. "You have 30 minutes. I turned to her and said softly, "Mom, you see what he's doing, right?" She looked up, but only for a second. "He's just checking in on you. He wants to make sure you're doing something with your life by threatening to come to my job." She sighed. "You're overreacting." I blinked. "So it's okay for him to threaten me?" "I didn't say it was okay," she muttered, I still on her phone. "But you're not saying it's wrong either," I whispered, my voice cracking. Her silence was a knife, not sharp and sudden, but dull, slow, and merciless. I wanted her to wrap me in her arms, to say she'd talk to him, to say she'd leave that awful group chat and stand beside me. But she didn't. She just kept scrolling. So I left the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at my cracked ceiling, the fan whirring softly above me, and all I could think was, how did I get here? How did I become someone who had to justify a $5 debit card charge to a man who didn't even raise me after age 16? How did I become a person who flinched every time my phone buzzed? How did my own mother become a bystander to my pain? The next morning, I messaged her directly, not in the group chat, just us. "Mom, do you really think this is okay? Do you agree with him watching my money like this?" She read it. She didn't reply. I waited the whole day. Still nothing. She left me on scene. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not just hurt, not just disappointment. Clarity. I had been waiting for someone to fight for me when the truth was, they never would. And if no one else was going to stand up for me, I had no choice but to do it myself, even if that meant standing alone. By the time Sunday rolled around again, I was already sweating by noon. It wasn't the heat. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the weight of the clock ticking toward 8 p.m. Father's invisible deadline. His weekly check-in. His power trip. I opened my banking app with shaking hands. My account balance blinked back at me. Rent was due in 5 days. I had no new job offers, only rejections. The last one was for a receptionist role at a company I barely wanted to work for. I took the screenshots anyway. Balance. Last 5 transactions. Job application emails. By now, I knew what to send. He had trained me. But something inside me hesitated this time. I stared at the images in my gallery, my thumb hovering over the send button in the group chat. My mom had already read the last message he sent. You know the drill. 8 p.m. Of course, she had read it. She always did. I could see she was online. Yet again, she said nothing. A strange feeling crept into my chest, not fear, not sadness, but rage, quiet, boiling rage. It didn't roar, it hissed. Why was I still doing this? Why was I still submitting like I owed this man something? He hadn't helped me pay my college tuition. He hadn't helped me when I was jobless for 4 months. He didn't contribute a dime to the groceries in my mother's house. He had no right. I knew that now. But still, I was scared. Not because I thought he'd hurt me physically, but because he knew how to hurt me emotionally. His words were sharp, cold, calculated. He knew how to twist them like a knife. Especially when he had an audience, especially when my mom was watching. I closed the chat. I didn't send the screenshots. And for the first time in over 8 months, I did nothing. The phone rang. His name lit up the screen, Dad. I didn't answer. Instead, I put the phone on silent, tossed it across the room, and sat on the floor of my bedroom, with tears in my eyes and my heart pounding like a drum. I was done sending receipts, done explaining why I bought deodorant, done justifying a $20 ride share or a $12 takeout order, done living like I owed him every corner of my life. That night, he sent voice notes. I didn't listen. I knew what they said. I didn't need to hear the threats. I had memorized them. Instead, I made a different move. I opened my laptop. I typed how to file a harassment report against a family member. The search results filled the screen like freedom. This wasn't rebellion anymore. This was resistance. And I was finally fighting back. The next morning, I woke up to 10 missed calls and 3 voice notes from my dad. I didn't play them. I didn't need to. I already knew what was in them, rage disguised as reason. Threats masked as concern. Control wrapped in fatherly language. I opened the group chat just to see. My mom had responded late at night. Just 2 words. Call him. That was it. No defense. No comfort. Just 2 words that told me what side she was still on. I stared at that message for a long time. Call him. After everything. After weeks, months of emotional surveillance, public shaming, and the constant fear of losing the roof over my head, I didn't call him. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote down every instance I could remember. The threat to show up at my workplace. The demand for weekly financial reports. The verbal abuse when I didn't respond quickly enough. The attempt to weaponize my mother's house as leverage. The emotional manipulation. The silence from my mother that made it all possible. I titled the note, Evidence. By noon, I received a final text from him that would change everything. If I don't get those screenshots by 2 p.m., I'll drive to your job and explain to your manager what kind of person you are. Don't think I'm bluffing. I know what I'm doing. My body went still. The words blurred on my screen, but the weight of them hit clear. That was the line. That was the final threat. There was no more pretending this was about guidance. No more explaining it as concern. This was control. It was punishment. I locked my room door and sat at the edge of my bed, heart racing. My fingers trembled as I called the only number I could think of. A lawyer. It wasn't a big firm, just a local woman I'd found the night before while searching for legal aid. She answered on the second ring. Hello. Hi, I think I need help. Legal help. It's about my dad, I said, voice shaking. She listened. Patiently, carefully, I told her everything. The group chat, the threats, the screenshots, my mom's silence, the emotional blackmail. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. This sounds like harassment and coercion. You have a right to privacy, especially as an adult. And yes, you can take legal action. I didn't expect her to say that. I thought she'd say it was a family matter, that it wasn't serious enough, that I was overreacting. But she didn't. She believed me. That was the first time I realized something important. Just because it's your parent doesn't make it right. And just because they raised you doesn't mean they get to ruin you. That afternoon, I began the process of filing a restraining order. If he wanted a battle, he'd finally get one. Filing a restraining order against your own father isn't something you dream about. It's not a goal. It's not something you even think you'll ever do, not until you have to. Not until the people meant to protect you become the ones you need protection from. I walked into the lawyer's office with my phone in my hand and a stomach full of fear. The lawyer, Miss Adams, looked at me gently but seriously, as if she could already see the weight I was carrying before I said a word. She led me into a quiet room, offered me water, and pulled out a legal pad. Let's go through this one step at a time, she said. I unlocked my phone and showed her everything. The group chat. The threats, the messages where he claimed he'd show up at my workplace, screenshots of my mom's silent read receipts, even the notes I had written documenting every incident over the past few months. Miss Adams read it all without blinking. Her expression never changed, focused, calm, precise. Has he ever physically threatened you? She asked. No, I said quickly, but the emotional stress is constant. I feel like I'm being watched all the time. I don't even sleep properly anymore. She nodded. That's valid. Coercion and harassment aren't always physical. Emotional abuse is very real, and in your case, it's systematic. She typed on her computer for a few minutes, her fingers moving fast. Then she looked at me. We can file for a temporary restraining order today. You'll need to go before a judge, explain your experience, and they'll decide whether it's granted. If it is, he won't be allowed to contact you, show up at your job, or threaten you again, or he could be arrested. I swallowed hard. This was really happening. I was taking legal action against my own father, and somehow, for the first time in a year, I felt safe. I nodded. Let's do it. She printed out forms and walked me through each section. I signed them with shaking hands. Every letter felt like I was writing a new story for myself. One where I wasn't the victim anymore. One where I chose myself over family loyalty. After the paperwork was done, she said, "You'll need to serve him with notice. It has to be done properly. We can arrange for an officer or court official to do it." I nodded again, quietly. Part of me was terrified of what would happen when he received it. But the bigger part of me, the growing, braver part, wasn't afraid anymore. That night, I went home and blocked him everywhere. I left the group chat. I deleted every old screenshot. I took a deep breath and slept for the first time in weeks without nightmares. Because now, I wasn't hoping he'd stop. I was making sure he did. I woke up that morning with a knot in my stomach. It was the day I'd be standing in front of a judge. Against my father. The very thought of it felt surreal. I had never even imagined a courtroom. Before this, at least, not with me at the center of it. And definitely not with my dad on the other side. I stood in front of the mirror and stared at myself. My reflection looked stronger than I felt. I wore a simple navy blue blouse and black trousers. Neat, professional, plain. But underneath it, my hands were trembling. Miss Adams met me at the courthouse steps. She greeted me with a firm nod and a warm, reassuring smile. "You've already done the hardest part," she said, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "Now you just tell the truth." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. As we walked into the courtroom, my breath caught in my throat. He was there. My dad, wearing his usual starched shirt and that fake calm expression he always wore when he knew he'd crossed a line, but still wanted to pretend he hadn't. He didn't even look ashamed. No remorse. Just annoyance. Like I had inconvenienced him by choosing to stand up for myself. His lawyer, a sharp-looking man in a grey suit, stood beside him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but my dad kept glancing at me and shaking his head. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The courtroom fell silent except for the quiet sound of paper shuffling and my heart beating like a drum inside my chest. We sat. Then the hearing began. Ms. Adams laid out the facts clearly and calmly. The weekly harassment, the monitoring of my bank accounts and spending, the repeated threats to show up at my workplace, the emotional toll it had taken on me. She read aloud some of the messages he sent. I could barely look up. But the worst part? Hearing them say my name in the same sentence as restraining order. This was my life. This was my father. His lawyer argued that he was just concerned, that I was overreacting, and that family matters don't belong in court. I almost laughed. Is that what it's called when someone stalks your finances and threatens your livelihood? Concern? When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly and faced the judge. My hands were still shaking, but my voice came out clear. I was afraid of him, not because he yelled, but because he wouldn't stop. Every week, he demanded proof of where I spent my money and how I lived. I was working, trying to survive, and he still treated me like I was a criminal. And the scariest part was, no one stopped him. Not even my mom. The courtroom was still. I just want to live without being afraid that my father will show up at my job or try to get me thrown out of the only home I've ever known. The judge nodded slowly and scribbled something down. And in that moment, I didn't care how it ended, because finally I had spoken. And for once, he had to listen. We stood as the judge exited the courtroom. My legs felt like they would give out at any moment. The entire room blurred as I sat down again, the tension still coiling in my stomach like a snake. My hands rested on my lap, cold and stiff. I had said everything I needed to say, but now I had to wait for someone else to decide if it was enough. Miss Adams leaned over and whispered, "You did great, really." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My dad was behind me, seated a few rows back. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to see his face. I could feel his disapproval burning into the back of my neck. He wasn't used to losing control. He wasn't used to being challenged. And he definitely wasn't used to being dragged into a courtroom by someone he raised. We waited. 10 minutes, then 20, 30. Finally, the courtroom doors opened, and the judge walked back in, holding a few pages in hand. Everyone stood again. I closed my eyes and took one long breath. This was it. The judge sat, adjusted his glasses, and looked directly at me, then at my father, then back at me. I've reviewed the testimonies, the evidence presented, and the messages submitted as part of the filing. He began, his tone neutral but firm. This case is not about a disagreement between a father and daughter. It's about boundaries, coercion, and abuse of influence. My heart skipped. Mr. ______, the judge said, turning to my dad. You may believe your actions were protective, but they were not. What you did was obsessive, intrusive, and harmful. My father shifted in his seat. I could see him balling his fists. You monitored her financial life without her consent, threatened her housing, her employment, and created a consistent pattern of intimidation. That is not parenting. That is harassment. I bit my lip to keep from crying. In accordance with state law, the judge continued, I am granting a temporary restraining order effective immediately. You are to have no contact with your daughter direct or indirect through phone, text, group messages, social media, or physical presence. You are not to approach her workplace or her residence. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. A pause. The gavel struck the bench. Court is adjourned. The sound echoed like thunder in my chest. I had won. Not just the case, but myself. I turned to Ms. Adams, tears slipping down my cheek. She smiled and handed me the court order. Keep this with you, she said. And remember, you were brave. You did what most people never find the courage to do. I nodded, finally able to breathe. For the first time in months, there was no buzzing in my chest, no threat hanging over my head. No messages waiting for me at 8 p.m. on a Sunday night. My father stood as we walked past him. He didn't say a word. I didn't look at him. I walked out of that courtroom and into the sun with my head high. This time, I was not his shadow. I was free. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with quiet. For the first few days after the court judgment, my phone was completely still. No threatening texts. No late-night voice notes. No demands to explain how I'd spend every dollar in my account. There were no more notifications from the group chat, because I had left it. And no messages from my mother, either. The silence was new, unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. Because for so long, my life had been defined by chaos. Now that it was gone, I didn't know what to do with the space it left behind. I sat on the porch one evening, sipping a cup of tea, watching the sky turn orange. It was peaceful, and yet, part of me felt strangely hollow. I thought winning the case would make everything better, like a switch flipping from pain to peace. But healing isn't instant. It's slow, it's quiet, and sometimes it feels like grief. Because I hadn't just protected myself from my father, I had lost him. Maybe he'd been lost to me long ago, when he stopped seeing me as a person and started treating me like a problem to control. But now the loss felt final, legal, permanent. Then there was my mother. She hadn't called since the judgment. No text, no how are you, no apology, just silence. I replayed our last conversation in my mind. How she told me to just send the screenshots. How she called me dramatic. How she watched my fear unfold every week and chose to do nothing. It hurt more than anything else. I picked up my phone and hovered over her contact name. I wanted to call her, to ask her why. Why didn't you defend me? Why did you stay silent? Why did you let him do this to me? But I didn't call, because I knew she would say, you know how your father is. And I couldn't hear that again. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote, sometimes survival means cutting the rope even when the people holding it are the ones you love. The next day, I got an email from a company I'd applied 2 weeks ago. Interview request. A real one. A good one. For the first time, I didn't second-guess myself. I didn't wonder if I needed to screenshot it for approval. I didn't panic about explaining it. I just responded. I got up, changed into fresh clothes, and started practicing interview answers. I was rebuilding. Slowly, quietly, for myself. No more reporting. No more apologizing for being independent. No more being afraid to live. And as I sat at my desk with my laptop open, heart beating with something close to hope, I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. It wasn't loss. It was space. Space to grow. Space to breathe. Space to finally belong to myself. I didn't plan to sue him. At first, I thought the restraining order was enough. A line drawn. A boundary set. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would finally leave me alone. But abusers don't stop because they're told to. They stop when there are consequences. 2 weeks after the order was granted, I received a message from a blocked number. It was a screenshot of my old job application email and one line. "So you think this is over? Watch." I knew it was him. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. The veiled threat, the continued monitoring, the fact that he still had copies of my private information, that alone was enough to send a fresh chill down my spine. And still, my mom said nothing, even after everything. That's when I realized I couldn't just stop at a restraining order. I needed to make this count, not just for me, but for anyone else stuck in a family that mistook love for possession, for those whose parents disguised abuse as protection. The following week, I was back in Ms. Adams' office. "I want to sue," I said plainly. My voice didn't shake this time. He invaded my privacy, harassed me repeatedly, and almost cost me my job. "I want to take him to court." She raised an eyebrow, then slowly nodded. "You're within your rights. You have the documentation, the timeline, the digital proof. If you're ready, I'll file the civil suit for emotional distress, coercion, and invasion of privacy." I was ready. The paperwork was thick, but I didn't blink. Every page I signed felt like a page of my story I was taking back. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was leading. The notice was delivered the next week. This time, it wasn't a quiet explosion. It was public, legal, a direct blow to his pride. He tried calling from another number. I didn't answer. He called my uncle, my cousin, even tried to speak through my mother. She left me a voicemail. "Do you have to do this? It'll disgrace the family. People will talk." I stared at my phone, then deleted the message. Let them talk. Let them finally hear what I'd been swallowing in silence for over a year. The court date was set. This time, it wasn't about protecting myself from future harm, it was about demanding accountability for past harm. On the day of the hearing, he looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. There was no storm in his eyes anymore. Just confusion. Like he still didn't understand how his own daughter had risen up and challenged him. The judge listened. Again, I spoke. I spoke about nights I couldn't sleep, jobs I couldn't focus on, groceries I was scared to buy, the constant emotional pressure, the surveillance, the silence. The judgment didn't make him cry, but it made him pay literally. He was fined for damages, legally barred from contacting me again, and officially labelled for what he had been all along, a harasser. When I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like a wound that had finally scabbed over.